evening is to look at that part of the baptismal covenant, which some of us have already made and some will make, and not too long into the future, where it says, "Will you persevere in resisting evil, and whenever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord?" And our answer is, I will, with God's help. Okay. So, there are some things that are assumed here in this question. One is that evil exists. One is that we will fall into sin, because it doesn't say if, it says whenever. And that with God's help, we can return to the Lord and be reconciled and restored. So I want to kind of look at what all that means in the context first of trying to define what I mean by sin and what maybe you think sin is. And then I want us to look at what have been called throughout history the 7 deadly sins, or the 7 capital sins, or there's different ways they've been called. And then last, I want to look at one of the spiritual practices that we can use to help us recognize when we have fallen into sin and how we can repent and return to God. So that's kind of my agenda, and we'll just kind of try to get through it. And please feel free to raise questions or comment. I love the way we had that Bible study and had a lot of free thinking, free ideas flowing, so that's what I want. If we don't get through everything I've got, that's okay. But first, I think we need to be on the same page when we're talking about sin. And for some people, that word just raises a lot of anxiety, because it feels very heavy, very weighty. It feels like we're saying you're bad, there's something wrong with you, you're no good. And so I want to dispel any thought that that's what sin is. Sin is not something that we are intrinsically bad and therefore we are sinful. It is my position, and I believe the position of our church and most churches, at least in the mainstream, that we are made in the image of God, that we are intrinsically good, that we have the spark of the divine within us that's like a pilot light that can never go out. It's been there since the moment we came into being, and it will be there forever. And nothing that we do can extinguish that divine spark of God that is within us. And that is truly who we are. That we fall sometimes into sin is true, and we need to look at what that means, because our baptismal covenant acknowledges it and says that we will do what we can not to fall into sin and to change, make amends, do something different after that. So when I think of sin, I think of straying from the path. Some call it missing the mark, but I like to think about a path that we're on. And I think of that path as being God's path. So I'd like you to imagine in your own mind and heart what God's path looks like. See if you can get an image, a picture of God's path. For me, it's beautiful. For me, it is a path that runs along a stream of quiet running water. I can hear the water when I think of God's path, because water is something that kind of speaks to me. It's green, it's tree, it's lovely. God's path. I don't know what your path is like, but I want you to imagine it for a moment. Just see God's path. That path that we want to walk on. So there is a path. We can visualize it, we can acknowledge that it's there. And it is the path that you are all choosing to walk on because you're here. You want to be part of God's path. So what is that path all about? What is God's path all about? Anybody want to throw to or what God's path is paved with. What's God's path?
I want to say kindness and helpfulness toward others. Jesus told us to love each other.
So the path is a path of love and kindness, a path of justice and caring. It's a path of putting others' needs before our own. It's a truthful path. It's a path of integrity, honesty. It's a lovely path. But we know that once in a while, we can kind of take a few steps to the left or to the right. We can kind of acknowledge that there are some other paths out there that can look pretty good. They could be paved with money, or they could be paved with power, or they could be paved with prestige, or any one of a number of things. Ease, right? An easy path, a path that doesn't require a whole lot of our effort to stay on it. So there are temptations that can lead us to a different path. The Bible's full of stories of people who give in to temptations. It starts out with a story of two people who give in to temptations, right? Why? Why did Adam and Eve stray when they had everything they could have possibly wanted? They just weren't on a path. They were in the whole big garden. They had it all, right? They didn't have to go anywhere. And they still strayed. Because God gave us this amazing, awesome, wonderful, powerful gift called free will. God gave us freedom. And with that freedom, we get to choose every single day of our lives whose path we want to walk on. Sometimes it's not all those other paths that I walk on. Money, power, prestige, it's just that it's my path. It's my path instead of God's path. So we all know about all those paths. So that to me is kind of how I frame what sin is. Sin is those times when I choose to go a different way, to take some steps off of God's path onto one of those other paths that for the moment look really, really good. When I was studying moral theology, I was taught to distinguish between sins, between an objective sin and a subjective sin. So what do I mean by that? Well, an objective sin is the act itself. I think we can all agree that something like murder is bad. And everybody, can we all go Good. We're sitting up here together. Okay, so murder is bad. Murder is a sin. Yes? But can I judge whether that sin is a sin for one of you if you committed murder? Can I judge? No. Who can judge? God. Because to make an objective sin a sin for me, I have to, first, it has to be a sin. Okay, so something good can't be a sin. Second of all, I have to know it. I have to be aware that this is a sin. And then I have to freely choose to do it anyway. Those are the three things that I learned make me responsible, culpable for my sin. It had to be a sin. I had to know it was a sin. And I had to have the freedom, mental freedom, emotional freedom, psychological freedom, all kinds of freedom, to choose to do it anyway. Okay? So when we couch sin that way, I think it makes it a whole lot more part of my free will to either sin or not to sin. All right? It's not just some objective bunch of commandments out there, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. It's me looking at my life, looking at what I'm doing and choosing the path that I want to walk on. Okay? And I have to know that the path that I'm choosing is away from God. If I don't know, then for me, God's not going to hold me responsible for that sin because I didn't know any better. You know, I heard one pastor talk one time about how a child, 2-year-old child in their high chair, dumps a plate of spaghetti on the floor, and that's sin. No, it's not. It's a sin if I do it, maybe, because I just want to make a mess for you to clean up. That might be kind of mean, sinful. But that child does not know that that's wrong. And so for that child, that can't be a sin. Does that make sense? And so it has to be a sin, we have to know that it's a sin, and we have to freely choose to do it anyway. Now that doesn't mean that we get to live in ignorance. Well, I didn't know, and I didn't want to know, so it doesn't count. Well, we are all called to have an informed conscience, to be aware, to learn, to try to understand our actions and how they affect other people. So we don't get off scot-free by just not knowing. We are called to be prayerful and to be diligent and to be aware of right from wrong and to know the difference. But it does mean that we have had to have the freedom to choose it. So we have to be unencumbered by pain and trauma from the past so that we are really choosing to act the way we act and not encumbered by things that take our freedom away. With me so far? Yeah? Anybody have any questions, comments? Okay. So some of us, or all of us some of the time, need to work on 2 and 3. We need to always be becoming more and more aware of what God's path is for us and what those other paths are so that we choose to avoid them. And we have to be making good choices. So we don't get off scot-free here. We've got a part to play. And so whatever freedom we have to choose, even if our freedom is as small as a mustard seed, God can work with it to help us grow and stay on that path. Sometimes we get off the path because we're not paying attention. But we're supposed to pay attention. Policeman stops me because I was doing 90 in a 50. And I say, oh, gee, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I'm not going to get off without a ticket because I was supposed to be paying attention, right? So we're supposed to be paying attention to how we live and how we treat others and how our actions affect other people and affect God. But so we don't get off scot-free. But when we do get off the path, when we do stray, we know from the Gospels that God is waiting for us to come back. Huh? God is always waiting and willing to welcome us back in, like the prodigal son who took his father's wealth, ran off, spent it all, wound up slaughtering the pigs, and was miserable, came to his senses. Okay? Thought he was doing a good thing. Went off, thought this was going to be great. Thought that path looked great. Went off, didn't turn out so good for him. He's miserable. Comes to his senses, he wakes up, he says, I see now I was wrong. Took the wrong path. I need to come back, be sorry, make amends, be my father's servant if need be, and get back into my family. That's kind of what we do. We recognize what we've done, and we come back. So, I'd like to kind of look at these 7 capital sins, or 7 sins that are at the head of all sinning. And I'll just let me keep on so I know what I'm talking about. And what I like about these 7 sins, if you can like sins, what I like about them is that they're not the biggies, okay? They're not, murder and some of the bigger things that we think of as being horrible things to do. They're kind of the things that we do pretty often. We can fall into these pretty regularly. They're kind of the stuff of soap operas and best-selling novels. They were recognized long time ago by the Desert Fathers and Mothers of the early church. So they have a long history with us. And these are some of the ways that we can so quickly, and without really recognizing it, start to stray from the path. So I'm about to tell you what they are, so you won't be able to say you didn't know. So I'm taking away one of your excuses, sorry. And then you'll have the freedom then to choose not to do it. So here we go. Why are they deadly or capital? Why are they the biggies? Because a lot of bad stuff stems from them. They themselves don't seem so bad, but what grows out of them, what comes from them,
I didn't
it
get
can
one.
be deadly, can really make our relationship with God very strained and distant. And it's not God that's going away, folks. God's staying right where God is. Okay, it's you and I that take the paths that lead us away from God. Okay, God doesn't go anywhere. God is always there for us. Okay, so their seriousness is not so much themselves, but what they lead us to. So if we could nip them in the bud, then we might not stray so far off God's path. We might be able to stay a little closer. So let's look at them and see what we can come up with. These are just human tendencies, okay? We're not going to spend a lot of time on each one. But the first one's pride. And what comes on the other side is the opposite, or the virtue, that can help us to overcome pride. So the opposite of pride, or the virtue for pride, is humility. So when you think of pride, what do you think of?
Ego.
Ego. Okay.
Thinking yourself more than others.
Think of yourself. Can pride be good? Can it be good to be proud? Don't we always tell our kids how proud we are of them? You should be proud of yourself for that A you just got. Most of the thing that makes these so difficult is that they're not all bad, right? There's a fine line between when they're wonderful and they're good for us and when they're not so good for us. So yeah, pride. We want to believe that we know we're lovable. We want to have a good self-esteem. We want to think that, we are a good person. We want to be proud of our accomplishments. There's nothing wrong with that. But when does it go awry? When does it go awry? When we think we're more lovable than everybody else, maybe? When what we do is above reproach because we did it, right? If I did it, it must be right. When there's some arrogance and conceit. When there's an idolatry of self. Can you think of some other ways that pride, as one of the 7 sins, shows up? Racism. Pride can lead to racism. Refusing to reach out to others. Me, myself, and I kind of approach to life. What's in it for me? A lot of these get into that what's in it for me.
Narcissism.
Yeah? Nationalism. It's good to have pride in your country, but when it gets to the point where it's the only country that matters, then it may have stepped over into something that's not so healthy. Yeah. Classism. Yeah. All the isms.
Privilege.
Privilege. Okay, so that's pride. Envy. And the virtue that can help us tame our envy is generosity. So envy can be defined as wishing that things were other than they are. I wish I had what you have. I wish I could do what you do. I wish I looked like you look. I wish I were as young as you are, right? It leads to sadness. So I was very envious, and then I got very proud of myself because I, yeah.
But it felt good.
It did feel good. And I said, I guess I'm gonna have to confess that tonight. Envy says, why not me? Why you? Why not me? Why couldn't I have? Why didn't I get? I didn't get to go to the right school. If I'd gone to the right school, I'd have as much money as you do. I didn't get this. You had more of that. All kinds of those kinds of things. Sour grapes. And it's an idolatry. All of these are idol worships. This one is worshiping what other people have, whether it's their things or their talents, their spouses, or whatever it is. I think the epitome of it is Snow White's evil queen, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. She's envious of everybody else and is going to wipe them out if the mirror tells her it's somebody besides her. So the problem with envy and why it can be, it's such a insidious sin, is that when we say that someone else's life is better than ours or more important than ours, then we're putting down the life that God gave us. We're saying that God didn't do it right. God made a mistake. And so then we have an excuse to just give up and do nothing. So we're saying that God didn't know what God was doing, which really isn't true, I don't think. And it also gives an excuse to just kind of cop out, which is another sin down the list a little bit further. That's when it's not envy, that's when it's the other side of that. That's why all of these are kind of, there's a good side and a bad side, that fine line. So if you are poor and homeless, you have every right to feel like things aren't going really well for me and this isn't fair and the systems are wrong that are keeping me in this poverty. I don't think that's envy. I think that's an honest assessment of the injustice of the world. Okay? I think envy is probably more a sin of privilege than it is a sin of people in poverty. Now, if even in poverty your envy gets so much the better of you that you become paralyzed by it, and it doesn't allow you to seek help or to accept help when it's offered, then it can be debilitating. But I think, when I think of envy, I think of it more as a sin of those of us who have, but always want more. Does that make sense? Anybody else want to respond to that? It's a very good question. Yes?
Yeah, because I was gonna ask, how can it be envy when you say, oh, I didn't get the education I should have had, when the society itself is actively working to make sure you don't get it?
Right.
Like,
Right, and when I said that, I said that's probably not a good example, but what I was thinking of is when I was getting ready to go to college, I could have gone to any one of a number of colleges, but I didn't get into one of the ones that I really wanted to go to, and my friend did,
yeah,
so I was envious, and I could have used that to blame the rest of my life. Any failures later on, I could have blamed on that one thing, and have been so envious of her that I stopped living my own life. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm.
But when we're talking about injustice and poverty and the things in this world, that's another level.
Okay.
You know, that's why this is so hard to talk about, because it's again, it's subjective. It's what is it for me? What are my motives? Do I know it's a sin? Am I choosing it freely? And all that.
Sorry.
So this generates from inside of us, but it's not, I mean, we're out of balance with God's world. It's not that God is sending us.
God, my opinion, God doesn't send us anything but love. It's the only thing God sends us is love. God doesn't punish. I don't believe that God wills us to have bad things happen so he can teach us something. I think God will constantly work good out of even bad things because God is love and God is always working for love and good in the world. And we can either cooperate with that or not. But no, I don't think God makes us poor or makes us sick or anything. The only thing God sends us is God's love.
And in some ways, these are when we're not cooperating.
This is when we're choosing to step off of the path, okay? Freely choosing. Remember that. That's important, because if you're in poverty and you wish you had a little something to eat, that is not envy, because there's no freedom when you're in poverty, right? Yes.
But just back to the point about privilege.
Uh-huh.
So this conversation is a privilege
It
conversation.
certainly is.
So the path is kind of corrupt by nature, right? Because we have inequality. We have children living within 3 miles of us that are going to bed hungry.
That's systemic sin.
Right, so I
That's
guess what I'm saying
big
is that
sin.
just to keep the context, the path is kind of corrupt already, structurally.
God's path isn't, but yes,
Right,
the paths
right,
that
the
we
human
choose to
path.
walk on sometimes
human
are
path.
corrupt, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to remember that the systemic sin is not our personal sin. However, we do all participate in it in one way or another and either benefit from it or lose from it.
And would you suggest that if we're not seeking to change the status quo, we're participating in it poorly?
I would definitely say that. Because if it's a sin, which it is,
Yes.
it's systemic evil, so we've already said that. We know it is. And we're choosing, and we're freely choosing not to turn turn away from it and pretend it doesn't exist, or take what we can get out of it, then yes, then it's sinful for us. We may not have caused it, we may not have started it, we may not have control over it, we may not be able to make a huge change in it, but we have to do our part.
So when I confess my manifold sins, I confess that I'm
Absolutely.
a member of this. I'm not doing enough.
Yes.
And Father Casey talked about a while back here, when we're talking about Jesus' divinity, that he did not sin, but he was part of systemic sin.
Yes.
As in, his human side was part of systemic sin. Like, he used the example that when I buy that shirt for $5 at Walmart, oh, I'm saving money, being thrift, but I'm not thinking about who made
That's right.
that shirt in China or whatever.
Mhm.
You know, so we are seeing personally as society.
Yeah. Yeah, our society is sinful, and it's a path that we can choose to be on.
I can't choose to be not part of society.
No, you can't, but you could not choose, you could do your best not to participate and not to freely choose. When you become aware that something you're doing is participating in that evil, you can do whatever you can do to extricate yourself from that. Sometimes that's very hard. Sometimes it means you have to leave the job you're in. Sometimes it means you have to leave where you're living, or, I mean, there's just, there's some really hard choices we have to make when it comes to this kind of things. And we do the best we can, and God knows that. Again, we're not gonna get down on ourselves that we're evil people because of this, okay? Yeah. Oh, I thought you had, yes.
How are we defining evil?
That which is not against God, I would say.
So is the same as sin?
To me, sin is the action, and evil is the big picture, the result. Well, I think it's more than a result. I think it's the power. Paul talks about powers and principalities. I think that's the evil. What did we say? We say we will resist evil. So there's evil in the world. There's bad in the world. There's things that are wrong in the world. There's injustice and violence and subjugation and oppression. Those are the big evils. There's too many to name. Sin, for me at least, is when I choose to participate in those things. And when I choose to walk on a path other than God's. And different people see that differently. I welcome anyone else to share how would you distinguish evil and sin?
So the ills of society to be evil, the evil in the world, and whether we choose to participate, to be a part of that,
Yes.
that's the sin.
That's how I look at it.
Makes sense.
Because you and I are not evil. Okay? But we do sin. We can participate in evil things, and we do sin when we do that. But we are not evil. Yes?
Do you think that we could do like I guess the difference between sin and like evil is intention? I suppose like evil is like you have bad intention, you don't really care about anything, versus sin being like, oh, well, I know this is wrong and I guess I turned down that path, but I realize that's wrong and that may or may not happen again, but I'm working to fix it. Versus like true evil being like, I don't care that was wrong, I'm just gonna do it my way, it doesn't really matter.
That could be a way to define it. What I would hear you saying is that when you participate fully in evil, you've gotten so far off of this lovely path that God has for us, that you can't even see it, and you need help getting back. And you've got, you need maybe some people to come along and help bring you back, but you've gotten out there. Hitler, certainly he participated in some of the greatest evils. Okay, but I have to believe that there was still a spark. Otherwise, I'm not being honest about what I believe human beings are. But whether he freely chose it or not, not for me to judge. But I know he participated and perpetrated some terrible evils. Brother Terry, you got any thoughts
I
on
kind of
this?
think that sin is the product of evil.
That's a good way to look at it.
That the evil is the all-encompassing, and sin is particularizing for me.
Yeah, that's good. Some people call evil the devil, right? Right? I don't like that image. That doesn't help me. It helps some folks. But that idea that there's evil in the world, bad, yucky stuff in the world, and when we participate in it, then we sin. But before we even get into those great big things, these 7 can be at the core of what makes it possible for us to not see the evil and get into it before we even know that we're doing it, because we've given into some of this. To me, these are more insidious because I'm more likely to do some of these than I am to participate freely in big evil. But I'm more likely to do some of this stuff. This is like a daily thing. Some of this, I get best. Can we move on to the next one? I like the next one. Anger. Never get angry. The virtue that helps us is patience.
What?
I don't know anybody that really likes patience. My grandkids hate patience. They don't want to be patient. Just be patient. Oh, they get so mad. They get angry. When I suggest that they be patient, right? But you can say, but Jesus got angry, right? Jesus threw all those tables over and got really mad, right? So there's a fine line, right, between good anger and bad anger. Not all anger is bad. When anger wills evil, anger becomes sinful. When anger wills justice, then it's good. When our anger at a situation prompts us to work for justice or to right a wrong, that's a good use of anger. When my anger is turned inward or turned against someone else to do harm, then it's turned towards sin. Yeah? No? Yeah? Makes sense?
Do you consider depression anger to be?
No, depression is a mental illness, a disease, a diagnosed condition that needs medical. That's like saying diabetes is a sin. No. That's why I want to be so careful to talk about free choice, because when we have depression or anxiety or some of the other things that can destroy us emotionally, that's not sin. And that's not what we're talking about here. So an anger turned inward is when we seethe and we feed on the anger, kind of get off on it, like we kind of feel energized by it, right? And we just won't get out of it. We just want to stay mad. Because we wake up sometimes when we're mad. Sometimes that anger's good. Sometimes we need it to fight injustice. But when we get tied up in it, when it becomes an excuse for our bad behavior, well, I know I got mad, but I just lost it. I couldn't help it. Yeah. Maybe that's something we need to repent. It can be a cover for deeper and harder emotions. Very often, anger is covering up grief or sadness or other really deep emotions that we're afraid of. And so it's just safer to be mad than to be in grief over something. So again, it's not for us to judge whether someone else is sinning when they're angry or not, because we don't know where that anger is coming from. We don't know if they have the free choice to be sinning or whether it's something else, because who gets to choose? Who gets to judge? God, right? Only God. So we can't judge another person's sinfulness. We can judge that their action was wrong. We can put someone in jail for murder so they won't do it again. But we can't say they sinned. Only God can decide that. I think there's too many people walking around telling everybody else they're sinful, or that you sinned. And we don't know. We don't know.
I heard a description the other day of anger is the face of fear.
Because when you're angry, you give a strong appearance, right? You look like you got it attacked when inside you're a mess.
Sometimes anger also evokes anger. So you can get into this twisting sort of a thing, you know, when someone gets angry and hurts you.
And then you get angry
And
mad.
that's that, get way back and say things that are hurtful.
On a bigger scale, I think that's why we never find the war that ends all wars. War begets war. Violence begets violence. Because we're angry. And we're going to get back. Revenge. Anger leads to revenge. Just never good. Anything else on anger? I know these sins aren't anything we deal with.
No, not at all, not ever.
Never get angry.
I'm so convicted tonight.
I wondered if Rebecca wanted me to teach this because she knew I knew you so well. Could be. Sloth. If you study the Enneagram, you know that a number 9's sin is sloth, and I am a number 9. So I had to cut this one down. This one was like this long. I don't think I'm doing too much on sloth. Sloth, the opposite of sloth, or the virtue that helps overcome sloth, is diligence. I think sloth is a sin of omission more than a sin of commission. It's the couch potato sin, right? It's the sin of not willing to do anything. Maybe it's what Mark was talking about, staying awake. You know, don't get relaxed while we're waiting. You know, don't sit on the couch and think it's all going to take care of itself. It's retreating and avoiding God's call. It's apathy. It's who cares? Why bother? What's it all about anyway? That doesn't matter. It's a sense of despair. Sloth is the absence of joy. It's kind of like living life anesthetized.
It sounds like depression.
It does sound like depression, but I'm not depressed clinically, and, and I can be slothful. So there is a difference, yeah. They can look like each other. That's why it's so hard to talk about this stuff, because then someone who's sitting out here and is depressed and is clinically depressed and really dealing with depression is sitting there saying, oh, see, she's telling me how bad I am because I, you know, You don't choose to be depressed,
And
that's
it
right.
is absolutely exhausting.
Yes. Depression. Yes.
You pair that with anxiety, and you're just nonstop exhausted at night.
Yeah. Exhausted but not able to rest.
And the worst of my depressions, your body feels like it weighs 10 pounds. And it really does. That you literally stand up out of bed and drop all back in bed because you cannot bear the weight.
And what makes it so hard for people who don't experience that is that it looks like sloth. And so we want to tell people, come on, just shake it off.
Yeah.
Get up, get going, move. If you just move around a little bit, you'll feel better.
Thanks, I'm cured.
You know, we don't say, gee, if you just try harder without those glasses, you could see.
Yeah.
What do you mean you can't hear? Just try harder, you'll be able to hear.
Take those hearing aids out, you'll be fine.
No, just try a little harder, that diabetes will go away. No. You know. But we do that with mental, emotional problems. We tell people to get over it, because we don't see it. It's kind of like a backache. People have trouble relating to other people with backache, because you look fine. You know, you're dying, but it's killing you, but you look fine. So, you know, nobody's too impressed. So this is something very different, because this is a free choice, right? You know it's a sin, and you're really choosing to do it. And I don't care. I just don't care. I just want to sit here. I don't care.
It's
that I
the
should
same
be
thing
doing
as
this.
lazy.
Yeah, it's like lazy. It's a lot like
That's what my
lazy.
mother would call
It's
it.
actually how computers don't
Quit being so lazy.
Yeah. It's the sinner who refuses to be forgiven. It's the sinner who says, I'm beyond God's help. Nothing matters. Nothing will help me. I don't care. It's all too hard. I don't want to bother. Not depression, just a free choice to say, I don't want to bother. Maybe it's just I don't want to bother for today. It's a passing thing. You know, just need a day off. Let the world go around a couple times without me worrying about it. But when it's on and on, day after day, and you just don't want to bother. Not depression. You could choose to, just don't want to. Freely choosing to just step out, not care. Know that what you're doing is hurtful to somebody else. Yes.
So what sort of sin does sloth lead to?
Well, good question. Apathy, the sin of not getting involved, not working to change things that can be changed in the world, not helping your neighbor, not being hospitable, not reaching out when you could to make somebody else's life better. It's a sin of omission, so it's a sin of not doing what you could be doing. So it leads to more and more of not doing. Does that make sense?
Silent, you're complicit.
Pardon me?
It's like that saying, if you're silent, you're complicit.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. Yeah. Not to decide is to decide. Yeah, not to take a stand. Yes.
I have friends on Facebook that write glowingly about the gospel, but they do nothing.
Uh-huh.
And I sort of call them gospel hobbyists, which is a really judgmental thing to say. But it really makes me perturbed because, you know, they just accept the privilege that the gospel gives them, but they accept the status quo. And I've accused lovingly that maybe there's some slothfulness at work here. But it's hard.
Well, you made me think of something, and I may regret saying it. I'll say it anyway. can kind of lead to sloth, can't it? I'm saved, I don't have to worry, I got it, you know, God loves, and God does love you, that's true. But, you know, it's just like, it's all taken care of. So I can sit back and wait for the rapture, wait, I got my ticket. I got my ticket. That can be a slothful kind of approach to your faith. I don't have to do anything because I got my ticket. And it's punched.
It's true.
All right. Sloth is kind of a fun thing to talk about. Greed. The opposite of greed is liberality, being generous and liberal with things. And it's easy to talk about this one. This is Scrooge, right, from the Christmas Carol. This is just, I want it all. I want to gather up all those silos, barns full of stuff. And the more I can get, the better. I'll build more barns if I get more stuff. We don't have a problem identifying it. It's out there, but it's maybe harder for us to identify it when it's in me. Because we don't think we're greedy. We may not greedy, but we have to go a little deeper, get a little more informed in our conscience. We might see that we have some greed to work on. It's also systemic, right? We live in a culture of greed. We live in a consumerist culture that teaches us to be greedy and survives and thrives on us being greedy. If we don't want more, then how will our economy survive? We got to keep buying stuff. We got to keep wanting more and more and more. What were we told to do after 9/11?
Go shopping.
Go shopping. Get more.
Why were we given a tax break?
Yeah.
So we can spend.
So we can spend. Yes. Yes. Pay them more so they can spend more. Yes. It's all about, you know, that's how we survive. The ads on TV. A minute ago, I didn't know I needed that. I didn't even know it existed. Now I can't live without it, right? Because that ad just, you know, I have to have that now. You know, I didn't even know that gadget existed. So it's an idolatry. It's an idolatry of stuff. It's not just that we desire, but that we desire the wrong things. When we're dealing with greed, we're getting our priorities all mixed up. And then that desire gets the best of us. And it takes hold. And it drives us. And we can forget about the other in our desire to just keep getting. We can run over other people in our desire to get a better job and get ahead and get more. We can just, you know, we're climbing that ladder, but we're stepping on people as we're going up, right? Because we're greedy. We don't bring people with us. We just kind of get there ourselves. The antidote is knowing when enough is enough. It's very hard in our world, I think, to know when enough is enough. Two more. Gluttony.
There's more ice cream back there.
I know. I know. This is another one I struggle with. Yeah. No trouble on that. The opposite is the virtue is temperance. Temperance has a bad rep because we think of it in terms of, you know, prohibition and you know, so you just can't drink at all. You just, you know, you don't ever take a drink. And of course, if you have a reason not to ever take a drink, that's not what I'm talking about. But gluttony is what Jesus was accused of, right? They said he was a glutton because he had these wonderful meals with people and he enjoyed having a party and he drank and had a good time. And they accused, you know, John the Baptist was the abstainer and the rigid one, and Jesus was the fun guy. And he was called a glutton and a drunk by some of his opponents. Gluttony is the inability to control our appetite. And not just an appetite for food, although that's a part of it. I think it's more than that. It's an inability to control an appetite for a lot of things. It's the idolatry of more. It's kind of like greed, but it even, I think, is a little different from greed in that it is, it's that grasping to get filled up. It's an obsession to get filled up. It's this
sensuality with gluttony that's not necessarily present with just pure greed.
Mhm. Well, and then we get to the last one, which is lust, which is very akin to all of that as well. We usually think of gluttony as a food thing, but as I said, I think it's more than that. Yeah. The sin is in being so worried about getting our fill, we can forget that there are those who have nothing. So like greed, but slightly different. It's more important to fill up our bodies than it is to fill up our souls. It's putting the priorities in the wrong place. All of these are putting our priorities in the wrong place. Anybody else want to say anything about gluttony?
I think there are racial and cultural components to gluttony too, because we will sit here and judge people who look different from us or behave differently than we do because of the color of their skin or the neighborhood they live in. And it's one of the worst aspects of white privilege. And so in other words, white privilege is a form of gluttony in my opinion.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah, good.
They all seem to have a way of stopping us from being present. You know, they allow us to have some excuse not to do rather than, you know, to do, to be. You know, they are,
What God wants us to do.
yeah, they're just,
Takes us away from being the whole person. That is what God's
yeah, they
purpose
it
for
just
us
gives
is.
us excuses, you know. Seems like.
Make it easier for us to step onto a different path. The last one, lust. The virtue is chastity. Lust is usually talked about in terms of sexuality, and it would be God's gift of sexuality that's gone astray. It's desire. Desire is good, but lust is desire misdirected. So what I think it does is it makes a person an object instead of subject. An object of my desire, an object of something I want for my pleasure, and I've forgotten that this other person is a person distinct from me who has their own needs and wants, and I have made them into a thing for me to use.
Taking hostage.
Taken hostage. And so I no longer honor that person as other, with a capital O. Other. So it looks like greed, but it's greed for people and what that person can do for me as opposed to greed for stuff. And it robs us of our ability to give love because we're not giving love, we're just grabbing and needing and taking.
And there's some school of thought that says that pride is the basis of all of them.
Yeah.
That it's really all about me, no matter which ones of these that I'm in. It's just all about me.
But when we're on God's path, it's all about
So,
God.
Nancy, question for you. Why do you suppose that in all, we said since the desert of Carlos College started talking about this, it's been in Christianity a long time. Why is it for any nation
Cruelty.
What is the question?
Why isn't there an eighth deadly sin of cruelty?
Oh,
When you look at our political, our country today, there's just cruelty.
I
It's
wonder
causing
though,
harm to others.
could you find that cruelty stemming from some of this? From our greed and our gluttony and our anger and our envy? I mean, these were first conjured up by desert monks who we might think, what are they worried about? What could they be doing wrong, right? They're all by themselves in a cave. They were still experiencing these 7 things, even when they were off in their little caves and they didn't have any, quote, temptations around them. They weren't seeing another soul, another human being for days, and they still had these, and that's where they came up with them.
where did they come up from?
From from the desert fathers and mothers when they were off in their own little caves. They were still
I can
experiencing
see
these.
where cruelty would be the result of envy, anger, greed,
Yeah.
gluttony.
Yeah.
all-
I've thought a lot about this. You know, Christ, when Jesus was on the cross, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. That he seems to have made an allowance for ignorance and lack of awareness. Sort of what you talked about at the beginning. And I don't understand it. The human part of me does not understand why Jesus would make an allowance for that ignorance and lack of awareness. But if he did, then aren't we not to? That's what I ask.
Does anybody understand why Jesus gave us a?
Because he was love.
Well, that's the final statement of love, isn't it?
I know when my children did things that I knew were wrong, but they weren't, that baby that throws the spaghetti, I make an allowance for that. That baby doesn't know. And Paul talks about us being unpaddled in the beginning because we're not ready for meat. But Jesus, I think, saw us all as little children. They didn't know what they were. They didn't recognize who he was, but they didn't know what they were doing.
I get two.
Yeah. So, this is one spiritual practice that might be something that would be helpful to you as you are trying to respond to the part of your promise that you will, whenever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord. So, if we all have decided that some of these 7 might be something we want to work on, then we know that we're going to occasionally, every so often, fall into sin. Maybe daily, that's me, maybe not so much for some of you. But I can get up in the morning and I can know that I want to be really kind to people. And I know that I love my husband and I would never intentionally want to do anything that would hurt him. And yet probably by noon, something he's done has gotten me a little agitated and I've gotten a little angry and I've been a little bit snarky with him, right? I didn't wake up saying I want to see how snarky I can be with my husband today, but I did. And that's something I need to work on. And it's probably touching one of those 7 things that I'm maybe not aware of. So this examine helps me to become more aware of those things that I do sometimes on a daily basis that are not helping me grow in my relationship with God and not opening me as much as I could be to God's love, because I'm in that me place. So it's usually done at the end of the day, maybe as you're turning your light off and ready to go to sleep. And it's 5 simple steps. Acknowledge that you're in the presence of God. Ask God for help. Thank God for a couple of things in the day that have been particularly wonderful. So the first thing we do is gratitude. Think about the day and what's been wonderful. It might have been as simple as, that was a great cup of coffee this morning, or wow, that was, the sunset was great this evening, or somebody who did something kind for you that you're thinking about. So you give God thanks for that, savor that for a minute or so, just kind of bask in that gratitude. And then review your day from start to finish. Notice where God's presence was active and you were very aware that God was there. And then notice things that perhaps you did that were loving, and notice when you were loved, and notice when you loved others. And then maybe take a look at some of the things that didn't go so well, that you are not so glad you did, that were perhaps missing the mark or stepping a big toe off the path. And ask for forgiveness of God, and then think about maybe what needs to be done to repent. Do you need to talk to the person that you hurt? Is that possible? Or is there some other way to be reconciled. And our church does have confession, a ministry of reconciliation, which too few of us take advantage of, but it's there, and it's another way of growing in our awareness of our sin and working to make amends and change it. So we think about that, and then we just hand it all over to God, ask for God's continued grace to be in our lives, so that tomorrow, we can get up and maybe do a little bit better, just a little bit. That prayer when the person says, "God, thank you that I haven't done anything wrong today, and everything is great, and I just haven't done one little sin. And now I'm about to get out of bed, Lord, so please help me with this." That's what I got on sin for you tonight.